So kind of at the onset, I think it's important to do just a bit of history about kind of how Darwin was thinking and what Darwinian evolution actually means. Now, when we think of Darwinian evolution, we generally think about biology. It's a way that we understand how evolution or how change in this very complex system, which is life, has occurred. But if you strip it down
Mhm.
to its basis assumption, Darwinian evolution is about three mechanisms. First of all, there's a form of variation or innovation, right? Not everything is the same. Change
Right.
happen in the system.
Right.
Secondly, there's a form of transmission. So once these variations have happened, there's a mechanism in which these transmissions are passed on to the next generation. And lastly, there's a mechanism of selection. There's a mechanism that will essentially select on these variations and kind of reward variations that are seen as beneficials and window out or like punish variations which are seen as harmful for an organism or whatnot. Now, I
Yeah, I
essentially
get that. That's the way I understand evolution. Yeah. Okay.
so that's essentially my starting point here. I was interested in three questions. How do new techniques emerge or adapt? So that goes back to the question of variation. How are techniques or how do techniques spread? So how is it that a technique like, for example, suicide bombing would emerge in the Middle East? How was it spread to Sri Lanka, where it was later adopted by the LTTE, for example? And last,
Right. Right.
what explains the adoption of a new technique? Why is it that some groups, for example, the LTT, will have adopted suicide bombing, while other groups like the PIRA will not have adopted suicide
Right.
bombing? So those were
Right.
essentially the
Great
three,
question.
yeah. So those were essentially the three kind of guiding principle of my research, and that's essentially what I set out to examine. So in every strain of hijacking that I looked at, I essentially asked myself these three questions. So what are the variations? What is new? What is the innovation that we see? How is that innovation spread? How does it kind of how does it get transported to another conflict? And lastly, why is it that some groups adopt this new variation? Why is it that others kind of eschew it, decide not to adopt it? So that's where the evolutionary framework comes in. Now, as far as the type of explanation I think this allows us, well, the first one, when I'm talking about a proximate explanation, I'm essentially just asking what are the characteristic of a technique, right? What does this particular version of hijacking look looks like, and what's its purpose? When we're looking at the more like developmental explanation, I'm essentially wondering how is it that it came to be? How is it sustained? And this is where kind of my wider methodology from the book comes from.